Welcome to Difficult Dialogues, Voices from the Valley. I'm Lynn Pasquerella, president of Mount Holyoke College. Difficult Dialogues is intended to bring to bear voices from the Valley on some of the most complex ethical and social issues of the day. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by Professor David Hernandez, who is a professor of Spanish, Latino, and Latin American Studies at Mount Holyoke College. David, thank you for joining us again.
Sure, thank you, Lynn.
The last time we met, you were talking about undocumented immigrants and the plight of thousands of individuals in this country who are undocumented. In the past 6 months, there has been a lot of debate and discussion over the government's policies with respect to undocumented immigrants. Talk about the recent developments at the governmental level, at the federal level.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Well, really what's happened since the spring and summer is there has been what's been called a surge of migrants, in particular children coming unaccompanied or children coming with one parent or two parents from Central American countries, and essentially traveling through Mexico, arriving at the border, and then turning themselves in and seeking asylum. And that sort of blew out in the media and has been framed as some sort of a crisis. And there has been a surge, there has been a rising number that's taken place, but the number had been increasing for a couple of years now of these unaccompanied minors. But the way it played out was in this sort of crisis mode, and now we're dealing with not only a humanitarian issue, but a sort of media frenzy and a political football as well.
What's the stance that President Obama has taken?
President Obama has, he's part of the sort of surge discourse and has has either increased funds for detaining these children, but also granting them some sort of legal counsel, and then asked for a larger amount of funds to further beef up the border and expand the judicial process for these children. The thing we have in the United States is we just reached a backlog of these deportation cases that amount to some 400,000 persons. The line is 400,000 people long, and Obama wants to place the children at the front of the line. And so the problem with that is that these are asylum cases, and the last thing you want to do in an asylum case is speed it up. And but that has been the response to try to send a message both to the electorate, but also to the sending nations that not to send the children here.
Where are they being detained?
It's an interesting process. Immediately, they're first detained by the Border Patrol, usually for about 2 or 3 days. The legal limit is supposed to be 72 hours, and so in very temporary facilities, oftentimes on concrete floors, on cots with blankets, and they just lay on the floor. And then from there, they get transferred to Health and Human Services custody, which is usually a detention center, which can be a government center. For a while, they were using Army bases temporarily, but they've started expanding family detention. So, but these, they sound like shelters. They're named residential centers, but they're essentially jails for immigrants.
And do the children who are coming alone have any contact with their parents?
Many of them are actually coming to reunite with their parents. And some come with parents as well. But the ones that come to reunite with parents, they're fleeing violence. The two things they always say they're fleeing is violence and in particular gangs. And so the parents just who are here send for them. They pay thousands of dollars to get them trafficked here through coyotes or human smugglers, and through a very dangerous process. And so so oftentimes the families are often here already. So it is a situation of family reunification.
We hear quite a bit about the tragedies of people dying en route to the United States. What's going on in the governments from which they're fleeing that makes it so urgent that they appeal to asylum, and how high is that bar?
Excellent question. Basically, the 3 countries that they're coming from, there's actually 4 countries, and we don't talk about the 4th country, but it's Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. And those countries are number 1, 4, and 5 in terms of murder rates worldwide. And so they're fleeing very violent places, very impoverished places, places that only 20 years ago had massive civil wars taking place, but now have very destabilized economies. Political changes in their governments have been rapid. and so they're fleeing these situations. They're coming here. And when they seek asylum, they have to provide, the official standard of well-founded fear of persecution based on race, based on politics or religion, or being part of a certain social class. And so that's been the difficulty, is proving they're part of a social class fleeing a particular kind of sort of urban violence. And so that's been the challenge. Cases take a real long time to prove, and it's been a real challenge.
In the meantime, are they given services, education, health and welfare services in these detention centers?
That's the idea. The idea, obviously, immediately I said first they're held by the Border Patrol, so they're just, again, sitting in a cell on a concrete floor. When they do get placed in the family detention centers, there are services oftentimes provided, some by the center itself, but you have people speaking multiple languages. Not everyone speaks Spanish or English. They might speak an indigenous language, and so providing services for them is difficult. They have legal access to legal services to prove their cases, but it is not funded by the government necessarily, so they rely on charities, on faith-based groups that provide these services, and might bring toys or educational books and things like that. But the difficulty is that now they're at the point where they've been in there long enough where they now need to go to school. It's fall, people are going to school, and so now some are being released and sent to public school systems. And as we know, there's been a great deal of reaction to this publicly. People have reached out their arms and said, we want to support these children, and some have protested against their arrival.
It's interesting, in our local communities, I will often see people carrying signs on one side or the other, and I know that in some of the border states this is an even more heated issue. Talk about the conflict between what's going on at the state level in places like Arizona and the position that the federal government has taken.
Well, because Arizona and California and Texas and now New Mexico, that's where along the U.S.-Mexico border, and that's where people are arriving. That's where most of the centers are at for these persons, and so the general public have blocked buses that are trying to actually place the children in a jail-like situation, and they're not protesting them being in a jail-like situation. They're just protesting them being in the United States, and so there's been a lot of signs, accusing them of having diseases, of being gang members themselves. There's now talk about them being part of ISIS or Al-Qaeda. And they're children, they're young people, and so very overblown arguments, like basically anti-immigrant arguments. And so the states, some have welcomed them, and some, a state like Arizona might not say we welcome them, but they do have private prison operators in that state that do welcome them because they get paid for housing them.
What advice would you give the administration in terms of the real need to address the issue now?
Well, there's short-term and long-term advice. On the short term, this is a humanitarian crisis. The children need support. We have all the tools here to grant them, to delay their deportations, to provide counsel, to provide better services, to reunite them with their families. So all those things should be done today, as far as I'm concerned. And there's nothing really stopping that except it being a political issue and people being unwilling to do that for political reasons. In the long term, one thing, I think that the largest problem with looking at immigration policy in the United States is that we always look at it in a very short-sighted way. We see immigrants at our doorstep. We try to figure out how to deal with them, either put a wall up, put them in jail, deport them. But really, and a lot of people will suggest this, what are the structural causes for them leaving their home countries? And granted, some of the media said it's violence and gangs and poverty. But then what's the reason behind, what's the reason behind violence and gangs and poverty? And more in particular, what is the U.S. hand in that? And that becomes the more difficult issue, and that's the long-term issues we can deal with. One, educating ourselves about U.S. military policy abroad. Even if it was 20 years ago, a lot of those people who are fleeing here to be with their parents that fled 20 years ago because of civil wars that the U.S. participated in and funded and supported. Economic restructuring. We passed a lot of, under the guise of free trade, there's been a lot of economic change in their countries where textiles, farming economies have changed significantly, displaced workers, they move to their cities within their countries, and oftentimes north, the United States or to neighboring countries. And so that's something that we've had a hand in. Of course, drug wars are very difficult, but what we oftentimes never talk about in terms of the most dangerous elements of the drug wars, or the things that fuel the drug war, are the need for drugs, and that economy, that desire, that consumption is from the United States. Guns that are part of this violence, they're not manufactured in Central America. They're manufactured in the United States. And so we're a part in the structural causes, not the entire part, but a big part. And that's the long-term solution. We have to address those issues, invest in places so they're safer, so people don't want to leave, so people don't feel compelled to bring their children through a dangerous journey, as you suggested. So those would be my short-term solutions, immediate aid, and then long-term planning to really prevent people being displaced.
President Obama is facing criticism for not acting more swiftly and being accused of pandering to people because of the elections that are coming up in November. It's an issue of how much injustice one should countenance for the sake of long-term reform. Talk about the dilemma that he faces in this regard.
I mean, the case of the surge of migrants is very difficult politically. It works from both sides. That people who say that he's lax on the border, that he invites immigrants in that shouldn't be coming in, they can say that now. People that say that he's cruel to immigrants and he's the deporter in chief, they can say that now as well. And so he's caught in the middle. And obviously, there's a stalemate in Congress, or between Congress and the White House. Nothing moves forward. So he's promised executive action immediately upon the crisis, then he's backed off from that. And every time he does that politically for an election, or because of a timing issue politically, that it further divides the communities. Oftentimes the advocates that are pro-immigrant, that they are willing to trade off for a long-term solution like comprehensive immigration reform, but they'll trade off the immediate consequences that are happening to the children today. And so politically, it's a football. And the sad thing is that years have gone. In his first year in office, he said he would pass immigration reform in that first year. It didn't happen, and there's reasons. There was the healthcare debate, but his position has become increasingly weaker politically, and years have passed. We're 6 years in, and some of these children or some of these migrants could have legalized by now. They could be pursuing great things economically. Some could be in college. There's lots. We've let half a generation go by in this administration, and now we're in an even weaker position to do things as just on his own as an executive, but also with Congress. I mean, it doesn't seem like anything's going to happen.
It is a challenge. I know that you've been doing research on this topic. Tell us about your research.
My research is actually on immigrant detention, on the enforcement procedure, but I look at it historically. And my work suggests that the discourse of crisis, that particular racialized communities, and anti-immigrant sentiment oftentimes contribute to these expansions in immigrant detention. And they could be for lots of different reasons. For health reasons, we've held Chinese immigrants in the 19th century. During world wars, we've held what are considered enemy aliens, like Japanese Americans, even though they're not aliens, Japanese non-citizens. And so in every decade, there's been some sort of expansion in immigrant detention. And as I've been trying to wrap up my project and complete my manuscript, now I'm now in the position of writing an epilogue about the Central American crisis, because all the hallmark elements of my study are in this current moment. You have a racialized community of immigrants. You have a crisis discourse on that it's an emergency, and we're throwing money at the situation, or there's political stalemate. There's anti-immigrant protest, and there's support for the immigrants. And so it seems to be just like another episode that contains all the elements of my study.
In each of the cases that you mentioned, there is what we might call a hard white racial frame that is put on the immigrant populations or the migrant populations. And you've talked about some of the stereotypes involved, drugs, violence. What impact does it have on the diverse community of Americans that there is this rhetoric that takes place on a daily basis through all forms of media?
I think it has a couple of effects. I think for the general populace, that people live in fear of migrants, and of course those that are perceived to be migrants. And in this day and age, that's Latinos, U.S. Latinos. The vast majority of Latinos in the United States are U.S. citizens. They've been here a long time. But oftentimes the presumption is this foreignness, this alienness that comes with those fears of health. Fears of disease, fears of drugs, fears of violence, anti-democratic tendencies, fear of their ideologies. All of this takes place and gets lumped on this very large community. That's the largest minority in the United States, so it's not a small group in any way. And so you get this conflation of immigrants and then the U.S. citizen co-ethnics, and that becomes a huge problem. The media and the crisis discourse also, we oftentimes will open our pockets towards dealing with the issue by simply, again, looking very short-sighted and dealing only with border issues. Militarizing the border, more technology, more border patrol, larger fences, longer fences. And we never look past that, past our own borders to, the long-term structural causes of displacement of these neighboring countries, of these American countries.
And yet there are those who speak about the economic necessity of having this population in the United States. Mm-hmm. Talk about that for a bit, the real work that's taking place on the ground with migrant populations and the impact on our economy.
For every person that's against immigrants, for the variety of reasons I just mentioned, there's always a huge population of people that want them. Certainly there's their family members that want to reunite with their family members, but economically, they drive the economy. They revitalize cities. They work for cheap. They subsidize our economy by making economic sacrifices themselves. And the U.S. has traditionally taken advantage of that situation. In the past, in the 19th century, migrants might sort of, they'll give birth to children, those persons will be U.S. citizens, and they would sort of grow out of that situation and might have access to a form of mobility that other U.S. citizens have. In the late 20th century and the 21st century, those migrants oftentimes remain poor. And their parents or their U.S.-born children often do quote-unquote migrant labor as well. They remain in farm work. They remain in the service economy. They remain working at hotels and in kitchens. And so we don't have the same mobility as we had before, oftentimes because there's millions that are trapped in this undocumented status. If we were to fix that and grant them a legal status and have an amnesty like we've had in the past, those persons can move up economically, and so will their children. And so there would be greater advancement, economically. But there's people that still want immigrants. Even in comprehensive immigration reform, we make room for low-wage workers. That's one of the populations that's there because it's a clear example of how we still need those low-wage workers for our economy.
We know that one of the most important factors in economic advancement is higher education. Tell us about progress that's been made with respect to the DREAM Act and describe the DREAM Act initiative for us.
The DREAM Act is a policy that's been in Congress for almost 10 years now, and the idea is to accept students people who've grown up here, undocumented students, went to public high schools, went to grade school here, they came here as children, and now they're ready for college or they're ready for military service. And it's to recognize those contributions by going to college and then contributing to the economy, by contributing to the military efforts abroad, that would grant them an access to permanent residency, work permits, and then a pathway to citizenship. That policy has stalled, and it's come close before to passage in Congress, but it hasn't passed. And so it's still it's just a bill. It's something that sits in the halls of Congress waiting for action. In the meantime, President Obama completed what he called a Deferred Action Program, or DACA. And that program granted those same DREAM Act eligible students, were the law to pass, they have the ability to gain a work permit and basically they cannot be deported, based on certain qualifications that they had. There's some that don't qualify because they're either too old or they might have a small criminal record, and that might prevent them. Or they might flunk out of college. That could prevent them. But if they follow the procedures, that deferred action, what's being deferred is their deportation. And so that's been very positive for the students. We meet a lot of our students. They're on our campus. They're on other campuses. My previous institution, there was a lot of them. and you know, they can breathe a little freer. Some of them are actually even having access to travel abroad and return to the United States legally. And so there's people in Congress that want to deport them immediately. They want to end the program. They want to defund the program. But it's been a huge success, and politically it was one of the few bright spots for Obama on immigration, because I think people really felt that this was a body of migrants that it was kind of a no-brainer, that they're very productive, and why not accept them? Now the question is, why not accept their parents? Why not accept their other family members as well?
What are the arguments for not accepting them?
There's a lot. I mean, I think anyone who has fears of all the traditional anti-immigrant fears, which are many have no merit, or they're just rumored, or they're based on stereotypes. But I think the hardest one is just the popular idea that we're rewarding persons that don't deserve something, and that's always very difficult to argue with. But they have contributed, you know, and they've been here for a long time, and they have children here, and that seems like a pretty strong reason to stay. And in the past, we've recognized this. You know, in the early 20th century, if someone had been here a year or longer, we wouldn't deport them, regardless of the situation. The idea is that they were part of our society, and we would keep them as part of our society. That used to be the common sense, and that common sense has changed. Now it's the reverse. It's like, if you're undocumented, even if you've been here 50 years, you should be returned to immediately. And so that's sort of the most difficult argument, I think.
We're a country that's based on the notion of human rights as inalienable, and we often take military action based on a violation of perceived human rights. As a medical ethicist, I'm particularly concerned about reports of the mental trauma that's resulting from the detaining of the children. We're facing a healthcare crisis to some extent. Tell us about that trauma that results from living under these circumstances.
The children are fleeing a dangerous situation, so they're already traumatized. And when they arrive here, they need social services, or they need to be with their family members. They need safety, something that they haven't lived with. And but the immediate thing we do with them is jail them, and that's traumatizing. And that's part of the issue, and that's it is a public health issue. And as soon as if they were to gain some sort of residency, again, it might be a breath of fresh air. Like the DACA students, they feel a sense of relief, but they still have to confront the past violence against them. I just read a study just the other day. Someone said that for the people that are transmigrating through Mexico, during that migration process, for women, 80% of them are being raped or sexually violated. 80%, I mean, an unheard of number. And so it's untold trauma, and that has to be addressed, and that rarely gets addressed. With refugee and asylum seekers, that's one of the key things that we have to deal with. And you know, dealing with mental health and physical violence. It's a very difficult issue. It's a amorphous issue, and it takes effort and time and money, and that's part of resettlement. You know, and we need to work on that. What's happening for those children who are, because and some of this trauma, what's happening in the detention centers is when persons are meeting a judge through a video conference or speaking with their lawyer, and parents have to explain what happened to them in their home country, why they fear return. They have to do that in front of their children, you know. And we learned this lesson again in a previous family detention situation where you can't have children hearing those stories, you know. But they are still today, and so we're adding to the trauma. The children are in jail. If they act out or act badly, guards and sometimes private guards or federal guards, you know, they sort of punish the parents for that. They deny them phone calls. They impede their legal process because the child is afraid, because the child is in prison. And so, of course, they're going to be afraid. And so that's probably the saddest part, is that we are adding a layer of that kind of trauma in the detention process, you know, which is why we should be prioritizing the concern for the child, you know.
You teach students every day at Mount Holyoke College. How do you encourage them to have a voice on these issues? What can we do in higher education to frame the issues in a way that will help students use their liberal learning for purposeful engagement?
I mean, that's always the biggest challenge. But one of the hardest thing to teach is to sort of impress upon a student is the real long view. Is that they're going to graduate from college and they can go to get more schooling or more training and pursue a career that can deal with these issues, in the long run. And so there's always that. But in the short run, it's always important too that they probably have the biggest say on the language we use to talk about migrants, on the discourse. I mean, they're at the forefront of technology that I don't even know how it works, but they know how it works. And so they can pursue projects and they can engage in the debate and actually change the discourse. And I think that would be one of the biggest things they can do, hopefully as well as getting good grades and pursuing their degree and then eventually their career. And so that's what I try to stress, is that because they can feel helpless when I present the story, and like there's nothing that can be done, but there's lots of things that can be done, and so I'm always trying to sort of impress upon them. And we have those things built into our curriculum. We have community-based learning. Some of my students are translating for nonprofit groups and doing other efforts at helping these communities now while they're with us at Mount Holyoke College.
I think that's important because, as you've noted in such a compelling way, the families themselves are traumatized, and to know that there's someone who is going to be an advocate or a friend to have us be a visible force in the lives of those individuals is certainly a benefit to everyone involved. You also are serving on the Commission on Diversity and Inclusion at Mount Holyoke College. Talk about the strength that comes from diversity, not only in a college environment, but at the national level.
I mean, I went to college, and it was a unique experience for me. I was the first person in my family to go to college, and I met people from different religions, different races that I'd never met before from my own community. And I think a lot of students, that's one of the first things they notice and gain from. Of course, that creates tensions as well because they have misunderstandings or they don't know each other. But a diverse populace can teach them about the world, can teach students to visit their neighbor, to look at persons that are different in a different way, in a more accepting way, and I think we promote that throughout the college. Everyone gains from that, from all sides. It doesn't mean there's not growing pains with that. Of course, you have to deal with that, but I think that that's one of the best things that going to college provided for me. That I saw the world in a different way after that. I couldn't really return to my old community and look at it the same way. In fact, I went back in time and thought about my experiences growing up and saw how race or class or certain privileges I might have had, were taking place. And I encourage my students to sort of to look at that and embrace that, to see that there's other nations besides the United States. There's other places to go and to travel abroad and to avail themselves of the resources we have. On the President's Commission, I think we can provide services for that, and it's not just. And typically, we're a women's college, but typically we're looking. We just changed our policy in terms of accepting all women, transgendered persons coming to the college, and that was a giant step forward towards diversity. But there's other demographics to think about. Immigrants, our foreign students. Persons it's their first time to go to college. The first generation college student is a new demographic. I mean, it's an old demographic, but it's a population that has particular concerns and needs. And disabled students. To think about diversity beyond just race and class and gender, but to look at these other facets. And I'm very pleased that we have lots of these programs that accept them. The FP program, the Francis Perkins program. Non-traditional students, and so. Diversity is bigger than just race, and so it's nice to look. It's positive to look beyond that as well.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you very much.